You don't have to raise your voice to be heard. Sometimes silence is the loudest thing in the room, until it isn't. Her? No, she's just a guest. My father's voice cut clean through the low hum of string quartet music, through the clink of champagne flutes, through 30 conversations happening at once in a living room that smelled like white lilies and old money. He didn't look at me when he said it. He was looking at Jack Reyes, my sister's fiancé, a Navy officer in a dress uniform that fit him like it had been tailored onto his spine. A coward who walked away from her unit. Best not to waste your evening on her, Lieutenant Commander. I stood in the corner with a glass of sparkling water I hadn't touched, and I watched 30 years of practice keep my face perfectly still. This flesh has taken shrapnel outside Ramadi. It has carried men twice my weight across 200 meters of open ground. But nothing, not one single wound I earned overseas, had ever cut as clean and as deep as my own father's voice, casual as weather, telling a stranger I wasn't worth his attention. Jack didn't smile. He didn't laugh along the way the rest of the room did, that soft, complicit ripple of amusement at my expense. He crossed the floor instead, hand extended, polite, correct. The moment his fingers closed around mine, they grazed the pale, rich scar that ran across my wrist. His whole body went still. I watched it happen, the exact second a man's training overrides his manners. His breath caught. His eyes came up to mine, and there was nothing polite in them anymore. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice had dropped an octave, gone low and careful. "Were you at Al-Hilla?" To understand why a decorated SEAL officer froze at an engagement party over the feels my wrist, you have to go back 72 hours. Back to a gravel driveway, a locked front door, and a mother's text message I almost didn't answer. I'd been staring at my phone for 11 minutes before I finally read it twice. "Come home? I need you here, even if it's just once." 6 words from my mother, Diane Whitmore, who in 31 years had never once asked me for anything. Not when I broke my wrist falling out of the oak tree in the backyard at 9 years old. Not when I left for boot camp at 18 with a duffel bag and a bus ticket she'd quietly paid for in cash so my father wouldn't see the receipt. Not once in 3 decades had she ever sent me a message that sounded like need. I was 3 weeks off my last deployment, freshly reassigned to a training billet at 29 Palms, teaching 22-year-old Lance corporals how to keep each other alive in the kind of terrain that doesn't forgive mistakes. I had exactly 0 reasons to drive 400 miles up the coast to a house that had spent the last decade making it very clear I wasn't welcome in it. I had built an entire adult life specifically engineered to avoid that house. Leave dates that never lined up with holidays, promotions that came with new duty stations 3 time zones away. An unlisted number I only gave to people who'd earned it. But there it was, even if it's just once, sitting on my screen like a flare in the dark, the kind you don't ignore even when every part of your training tells you the terrain ahead is compromised. I called my staff sergeant, traded a training block with another instructor, and packed 1 bag, because that's the only kind of packing I know how to do anymore. Then I drove. The road up Highway 1 in October is a kind of violence and a kind of peace at the same time. Cliffs dropping into fog, the Pacific doing whatever the Pacific wants, 200 feet below the guardrail. I'd done 6 deployments in 6 years. I'd breathed sand until sand was just what air was supposed to taste like. I killed the engine outside a white 2-story colonial in Carmel by the Sea, the kind of house that photographs well and means nothing. And for a long moment I just sat there with my hands on the wheel. My father was already on the porch. He wore a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my last set of body armor, and he did not walk down to meet me. He did a slow visual sweep instead. The dried mud on my boots, the sun-faded patches on my field jacket, like he was cataloging evidence. "Use the side door," he said. "No hello." "No, you look thin, or it's good to see you. Your mother just had the hall carpet redone for the engagement party. I won't have you tracking that through the house." I wiped my boots twice on the mat by the porch steps anyway. Old habit, the kind that core beats into you until it's just who you are. Clean gear, clean boots. No excuses, and then I walked around to the side entrance like he asked. I didn't argue. Arguing with Richard Whitmore had never once in my life produced anything except a longer argument. The kitchen smelled like lemon cleaner and roasting meat. My sister Melanie stood at the marble island in a cream silk dress, a diamond the size of a knuckle catching the light on her left hand. She crossed the room and hugged me, a performance of a hug, shoulders back, exactly 6 inches of clearance so my jacket wouldn't touch her dress. "Jack's family is coming tonight," she said, voice dropping the second she pulled away. Don't bring up the military thing. We're trying to look normal. Sit somewhere quiet and don't make it weird. She turned on her heel, heels clicking against hardwood, and left me standing there with my duffel bag in the middle of a kitchen that had never once, in 31 years, felt like mine. I went upstairs to my old room. There was no bed. They'd knocked the wall through years ago, turned it into a walk-in closet for Melanie. Rows of shoes, rows of dresses, a smell of expensive perfume where books used to be. I kicked a shoebox out of the way to set my bag down, and the lid popped and paper spilled across the floor. Bank statements. A joint savings account. My name and my father's name on it, dated more than a decade back. The account where I deposited 3 years of double shifts at a diner before I ever put on a uniform. Every aching feet burned hand dollar I'd saved toward college. I remembered opening that account at 17. My father's signature required because I was still a minor. Him signing it without even looking up from his newspaper. Like it cost him nothing to put his name on a promise he never intended to keep. The balance column read 0. I checked the date twice because some part of me didn't want it to be true. It matched, almost to the week, the spring Melanie had cried in the living room about a boutique going under, begging our father to buy her a stake in a business that folded 18 months later anyway. He hadn't just borrowed against my future. He'd spent it on someone else's and never once in 10 years mentioned it to me at all. Let me keep believing every time I sent money home during deployments that there was still something in that account waiting for me on the other side of my enlistment. I sat on the floor of what used to be my bedroom, and I did the math in my head, slow, careful, the way you clear a room. Check every corner before you decide what you feel about it. My hands were steady. That surprised me more than the number on the page did. 12 years of training your body to hold still under fire does strange things to how you process betrayal that doesn't come with an explosion attached. Underneath the statements was something else. A small envelope sealed, my name on the front, in handwriting I recognized instantly. My mother's careful, looping cursive, the same hand that used to sign permission slips and, once, a very small check for a bus ticket out of this house. I didn't open it. Not then. I folded it once and put it in my jacket pocket, next to the bank statement, and I zipped the pocket shut. Whatever was in it could wait. A soldier assesses one threat at a time, and I already had enough to carry down 2 flights of stairs into a dinner I hadn't asked to survive. I didn't run downstairs. I didn't slam anything. That kind of reaction is for people who've lost the perimeter. I stood up, brushed the dust off my knees, and went down to dinner because the doorbell was already ringing and the Reyes family had arrived. The dining table sat 10 feet of polished mahogany under a crystal chandelier. My father held court at the head of it like a king with a captive audience. Melanie and Jack sat at the center, flanked by wine glasses and a bloody cut of roast beef. I was given the chair closest to the swinging kitchen door, the exile seat, the one reserved for whoever was expected to clear plates when dinner was over. It was the same chair I'd sat in at every holiday dinner since I was 14 years old, close enough to the kitchen that the hired staff's elbows brushed my shoulder every time they came through with a new tray. Far enough from the head of the table that nobody had to look at me while they talked. My father talked. He always talked. He built an entire personality around filling silences other people might have used to ask a real question. Melanie's always known exactly what she wants out of life, he told Jack's parents, dragging a knife through his beef, red juice pooling on white china. She's stable, ambitious, doesn't run when things get hard. His eyes flicked toward my corner of the table on that last word, and I understood exactly who the sentence was really about. It wasn't the first time he'd built a compliment for one daughter entirely out of the wreckage of the other. Jack's mother asked a polite question about wedding venues. Melanie answered at length, gesturing with her wine glass, and I watched Jack's attention drift somewhere else entirely, toward the window, toward the fog outside, toward anywhere that wasn't the performance happening 2 feet from him. Gary Holt, one of my father's business partners, a loud man who'd made a career selling used trucks 2 towns over, had been working steadily through a bottle of Cabernet since the appetizer course. He leaned across the table now with his fork pointed at my face like a weapon, close enough that I could smell the wine on his breath. "Still drifting around the country, are you?" he said, chewing with his mouth open. "Heard the Corps kicked you loose years back." The room went quiet in that particular way. Rooms go quiet when everyone is waiting to see if someone will cry. Melanie didn't miss a beat. She never did. She left her unit behind, she said to Jack's mother, voice soaked in manufactured pity. It's an open secret around here. Some things you don't wash off. My father took a slow sip of wine and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. I set my fork down. I let 2 full seconds of silence sit in the room before I spoke. Because in 12 years of service, I had learned that the loudest thing you can do at a table full of liars is refuse to raise your voice. I was never discharged, Dad, I said, and my voice came out level, almost gentle. I was just never asked what I actually did out there. Nobody said anything for a moment. My father's jaw worked like he wanted to answer and couldn't find the words fast enough. It was the only thing I said that whole dinner. I learned a long time ago that a single well-placed round does more damage than an entire magazine emptied in panic. Jack Reyes was watching me the way you watch terrain you don't trust yet. Not with suspicion exactly, but with the kind of attention that catalogs everything and commits to nothing. He hadn't laughed at Gary's joke. He hadn't laughed at any of it, and at a table full of people performing amusement on cue, his stillness stood out like a flare of its own. When the meal wound down and the men drifted toward the den for scotch, he caught me near the hallway, voice pitched low enough that it wouldn't carry. "Where'd you serve, Major?" I hadn't told him my rank. He'd guessed it, from the way I'd angled my chair toward the exits at dinner maybe, or the calluses on my hands, or 12 years of habits I couldn't fully switch off even at my own family's table. Men who've led people into bad terrain develop an instinct for recognizing the same training in someone else, the same way old boxers can spot a stance across a crowded room. "A lot of places, Lieutenant Commander," I said. "Hard to keep track." It wasn't a lie. It also wasn't an answer, and we both knew it. He nodded once, like he understood exactly what kind of door I'd just closed and let it go, for now. There was something almost respectful in the way he didn't push. Some people, when they sense a wall, try to find the gap in it. He just filed away that the wall existed. Later, clearing plates, because that was apparently still my job at 31 years old, I found my mother in the kitchen, drying a dish that was already dry, the water long since shut off. She didn't say much. She never did in that house, where saying much had never once gone well for her. I'd watched her, over the years, get smaller and quieter at every family gathering, like she'd learned that the safest amount of space to take up was none at all. "You still clean up after everyone," she said quietly, not looking at me, running the towel over a plate that had been dry for a full minute. "You did that as a little girl too. I used to find you at the sink at 9 o'clock at night, doing dishes nobody asked you to do, just so the kitchen would be clean before your father came down in the morning." I looked at her, really looked, for maybe the first time all evening, and there was something in her face I hadn't seen in years. Not quite an apology. Something adjacent to one, the way weather looks adjacent to a storm before it actually breaks. "Mom," I started, not entirely sure what I meant to say next. We heard my father's footsteps in the hall, unhurried, coming back from the den for more ice. She turned back to the counter before he came through the door, shoulders squaring into the same careful posture I'd watched her hold my entire life, and the moment folded itself shut like it had never happened at all. I finished stacking the plates in silence, and neither of us said anything else that night. The next morning, gray fog rolled in off the water and swallowed the coastline whole. The kind of fog that turns the whole world down to about 40 feet of visibility and the sound of waves you can't see. Melanie dragged Jack out to the bluffs behind the house for engagement photos before the party that night, and I was ordered along to carry her makeup bag because apparently that was still a job I qualified for. Even at 31, even after everything I'd carried across 3 different countries that weighed considerably more than a leather cosmetics case, I kept 30 paces back, old instinct. The standard interval for moving in open terrain, the kind of distance that gives you a clean field of view without making you part of the picture. I watched my sister pose at the edge of a 200-foot drop, entirely absorbed in her phone screen, ignoring the ocean and the man she was supposed to marry in roughly equal measure. She swiped through filters, tilted her chin, checked her reflection in the black mirror of her own screen, more than she ever looked at the actual view behind her. Jack stood a few yards off to the side, hands in his coat pockets, looking cold and faintly out of place. Watching her perform for an audience that wasn't there with the particular patience of a man used to waiting out situations he can't fix by force. Then, without a word to her, he turned and walked away from the edge, up the slope toward me, boots crunching dead grass, moving with the unhurried, deliberate pace of a man used to closing distance without alarming anyone. He stopped 2 feet to my right and looked out at the water instead of at me. 2013, he said. Al-Hilla, there was a building collapse. Joint Task Force, 6 operators trapped under the rubble. He wasn't asking exactly. He was testing a theory. You know anything about that? My hands tightened on the strap of Melanie's makeup bag. I kept my eyes on the horizon. I've heard the story, I said. Flat, impenetrable. Everybody in the community has. It wasn't the whole truth, and it wasn't a lie either. I wasn't going to hand my service record to a man 3 days from marrying into my father's house of half-truth, no matter how carefully he was circling the subject. He let out a short breath, not quite a laugh, the sound a man makes when he knows exactly how thoroughly he's being managed. Fair enough, Major, he said, and something in his tone told me he'd file the conversation away and come back to it later. Men like him always did. The party started at 7. By 8, the Whitmore living room was full of 100 people who'd never once asked me a question they actually wanted the answer to. Caterers moved through the crowd with trays of things on toothpicks. A string quartet played something classical and forgettable in the corner. My father moved through the room like a man closing deals, laughing too loud at things that weren't funny, refilling glasses that weren't empty, working the room the way he probably worked rooms his entire adult life. I stood near the edge of it in my one good dress, the kind of navy blue that doesn't draw attention, and watched Melanie hold court near the fireplace, Jack's ring catching the light every time she gestured. She hadn't looked at me once since I'd walked in. That was, if I was honest with myself, easier than the alternative. I was standing near the wet bar, not drinking, just holding a glass because holding something gives your hands somewhere to be, when Gary Holt found me again, 3 drinks further into the evening and considerably less careful about it than he'd been at dinner. He got close. Too close, the kind of close that's a violation, before it's a threat, and jabbed a finger in my direction. "You're an embarrassment," he said, loud enough that the room around us started to notice. "Running out on your unit and then crawling back here to leech off your father. You shouldn't even be in this house." The room did that thing rooms do, a collective half-step back, a hush, everyone waiting to see if I'd break. I didn't move. I let my weight settle low and even, the way you do before contact, and I watched his hand start to come up toward my chest. It never got there. "Sir." Jack's voice cut across the room before Gary's hand finished its arc. He was suddenly just there between us, not a hand raised, not a fist thrown, just his body, wide and immovable, and a voice that had clearly given orders to men holding rifles. "Back up, now!" Gary Holt backed up. Men who talk that loud usually do. The second someone with actual authority tells them to stop. My father saw the whole thing from across the room and did not move to defend me. He didn't move to defend Gary either. He did something worse. He needed a scapegoat to cut the tension in his own living room, and he chose the easiest target he had. "Her?" he said, loud, pointing a finger at me like I was a stain on the carpet. "No, she's just a guest, a coward who abandoned her unit and ran." He said it exactly the way he'd said it at dinner, exactly the way he'd probably been saying it to strangers for years, a story so well worn it came out of him without any thought at all. "Best not to pay her any mind, Jack. This flesh has taken shrapnel in Fallujah. I have pulled metal out of my own leg without making a sound." Nothing had ever cut like that sentence, delivered casual as small talk, by the man whose last name was still on my birth certificate. Jack didn't laugh. He turned and he reached for my wrist, not to make a scene, just to physically place himself between me and the room, and his fingers closed over the scar. I watched it register on his face in real time. The texture under his hand wasn't a kitchen accident or a car crash. It was the unmistakable signature of a rescue cable tearing through flesh under load. And there is exactly one place a person gets a scar shaped like that. "Your iron Ren," he said, so quietly it barely reached me over the noise of the party. Not a question anymore. My father frowned, genuinely confused. "What on earth are you talking about, Jack? She doesn't have a call sign. She's a desk clerk who couldn't handle the pressure." Jack turned his head slowly toward my father, and whatever had been holding his temper in check all evening simply left his face. "Get Master Chief Reyes out here," he said. Now, the crowd parted the way crowds do when someone's voice carries actual weight behind it. From near the far wall, an older man stepped forward, white hair cropped close, a slight limp, a row of ribbons on his jacket that told their own story without a single word spoken. Master Chief Daniel Reyes, Jack's uncle, guest of honor, walked with the unhurried gait of a man who had never once in his career needed to move fast to be taken seriously. My father tried to intercept him halfway across the room. "Master Chief, please, this is just a family misunderstanding." Daniel Reyes walked past him like he wasn't there. He stopped in front of me and studied my face for a long moment, the set of my jaw, the calluses on my hands, the scar. Jack was still, gently, holding out into the light. "Commander," he said to Jack without looking away from me, "you called." "Tell them what you know about the Al-Hila collapse," Jack said. His voice had gone flat and cold in a way I recognized because I'd used that same voice myself more than once in rooms much worse than this one. Daniel Reyes exhaled slowly, and when he spoke he chose every word like it cost him something. 30 years in the Navy teaches a man exactly how much truth he can hand a room full of civilians without compromising anything that matters, and he walked that line with the precision of someone who'd walked it before. "I can't give you the details," he said, and his eyes swept the room once, taking in every wide-eyed spectator with the same flat assessment I imagined he'd once given hostile terrain. "That operation is still classified, and it's going to stay that way, regardless of how many people in this room think they're owed an explanation." He let that sit for a second, let the whole room feel the weight of what he wasn't saying. "But I can tell you one thing without breaking a single regulation. The officer standing in front of you was put up for the Silver Star for what she did that night. She turned down the ceremony." The ice in my father's glass cracked audibly in the silence. "They called her Iron Wren," Daniel Reyes added, and for the first time his voice softened, just slightly. "Not because of her rank. Because that night in the dark, under a collapsed building, nobody saw her coming. They just heard her voice, and then, one by one, 6 men came out of the rubble. She was gone before any of them got a good look at her face." Melanie's expression cracked open like glass. Whatever calculation had been running behind her eyes all evening, how to salvage the night, how to keep the spotlight, collapsed all at once. "He's lying," she said. "Too loud, too fast. She's a paper pusher. Everyone knows she ran. She grabbed at Jack's sleeve. Baby, please, get her out of here. She's ruining everything." Jack looked down at her hand on his jacket like it belonged to someone he'd never met. He didn't shake her off violently. He simply reached over, unhooked her fingers one at a time, and set her hand back at her side. "Melanie," he said, quiet now, almost gentle, which was somehow worse than shouting, "stop talking." He turned back to me. The room had gone completely silent, the kind of silence you could have heard a dropped pen through. He straightened, and for a moment I watched a man set down every civilian mannerism he'd been wearing all evening and stand at something very close to attention. "Major Whitmore," he said, "were you at Al-Hila?" I didn't explain myself. I didn't owe the room an accounting of what I'd bled for. I stood a little straighter, met his eyes, and gave him a single nod. The change in him was immediate. His shoulders squared. His chin came up. He took one deliberate step back, the kind that creates space out of respect rather than distance, and reached up, not to salute bareheaded, which would have meant nothing and broken every regulation he'd spent his career respecting, but to the inside pocket of his jacket where he pulled out a folded garrison cap and set it on his head. Then his hand snapped up to his brow, sharp and clean, and held there. Behind him, Daniel Reyes did the same. A half second later, his bad leg locking into as close to attention as it could still manage. "Good evening, Major," Jack said, and his voice carried through that whole gilded, humiliated room like something out of a different world entirely. A champagne glass slipped out of Melanie's hand and shattered against the marble floor. Nobody moved to clean it up. Nobody moved at all. My father took a step back and hit the edge of the coffee table hard enough to stagger. For 10 years, he had built a very careful story, and he watched it come apart in real time in front of every business partner and social contact who mattered to him. Jack dropped the salute after 3 full seconds and turned to face my father directly. The room watched him do it the way you watch weather change, that particular stillness that settles over a crowd right before something breaks open completely. 10 years, Jack said, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the room without him needing to raise it. "For 10 years you've told people your daughter ran from a firefight. You told me, at your own dinner table in front of my parents, that she was trash the military was right to discard. Do you have any idea what that word means to the people in this room who've actually worn a uniform? My father's mouth opened and closed several times before anything came out. The practiced charm that had carried him through 100 negotiations, completely deserting him for possibly the first time in his adult life. I was protecting this family's reputation, he finally managed, voice cracking, hands gesturing at nothing in particular. You don't understand the pressures of running a household like this one. Melanie needed stability. She needed something to hold on to. And Emily was always so capable. She never seemed to need anything from anyone. So you decided the daughter who could survive without you didn't deserve your protection, Jack said, cutting through the excuse before it could finish forming. And the one who couldn't survive without constant reassurance got to build her whole identity on top of her sister's stolen combat record. That's not stability, Mr. Whitmore. That's cruelty with better lighting. You stole a Marine officer's combat record, Jack said, cutting him off, and used it to make your other daughter look better at dinner parties. That's not protecting a family. That's using one daughter as furniture to prop up another. My father's face went through several colors before he said the thing I never expected him to say. Not in 100 years, not in front of anyone. My brother, he said, and his voice broke apart completely. My brother died in the Gulf. I was 22. I watched them fold a flag on a coffin and hand it to my mother, and I told myself I would never sit through that again, not for anyone I loved. He looked at me, and for 1 second, just one, I saw something in his face that wasn't contempt. I didn't push you toward the recruiter's office because I hated you. I pushed you because some sick part of me thought if you left, I wouldn't have to watch you become something I'd have to bury. It wasn't an excuse. It didn't undo a decade of casual cruelty or a stolen bank account or every dinner table where he'd let strangers call me trash while he ate his cheese and looked at the wall. But it was, for the first time in my adult life, an actual reason instead of a shrug. You should have told me that 12 years ago, I said. Instead of telling me I was garbage in front of people who forget my name by Tuesday. He didn't have anything to say to that. Nobody in that room did. Master Chief Reyes turned without another word, the tip of his cane striking the hardwood floor once, and led the entire Reyes side of the party toward the front hall. They didn't wave goodbye. They didn't wave goodbye. They didn't need to. Jack looked down at Melanie, who had sunk to her knees on the ruined Persian rug, sobbing in a way that had finally stopped being performance and become something closer to real. He set the small velvet ring box gently on the counter beside her. This was your family's gift, he said. It should stay with someone who understands what it means to earn something instead of inheriting it. For one moment, my sister looked up at me, mascara running, and something in her voice cracked open that I had genuinely never heard from her before. I didn't know, she said, about the account. I swear to you, I didn't know. I didn't answer her right away. 12 years of watching people lie to save themselves teaches you the difference between a performance and a confession, and I honestly couldn't tell in that moment which one this was. So I just nodded once and let it sit unresolved, because not everything gets closure in a single night, and I'd stopped expecting it to. Jack walked out through the front hall. The heavy door closed behind him with a sound that echoed through the whole house like something locking permanently shut. Master Chief Reyes and the rest of the Reyes family filed out silently after him, and nobody in that living room made a single sound until the last car pulled away from the driveway outside. By 9:30, the party had emptied itself out in stages, the way a wound bleeds, slow at first, then all at once. Gary Holt and the rest of my father's business partners filed out through the back, heads down, careful not to make eye contact with the wreckage they were leaving behind. The same men who'd laughed along at dinner now moving like they were fleeing the scene of something they didn't want their names attached to. Nobody offered me an apology. I didn't expect one from any of them. They were, all of them, entirely beside the point, background noise in a story that had never actually been about them. Melanie was still on the floor when the last of the guests had gone. Mascara tracked down both cheeks, the ruined rug soaking wine into its fibers beneath her. I stood near the doorway for a moment, unsure whether to leave or stay, and something in her posture, small, folded in on itself, nothing like the practiced elegance she'd worn all evening, made me stop. I used to watch you get ready for school, she said, not looking up, voice hoarse from crying. You'd iron your own uniform shirts because Mom worked doubles and Dad never noticed. I used to think you were the strongest person I knew. And then somewhere along the way, it got easier to believe the version of you Dad kept telling everyone, because if you were the coward, then I didn't have to feel guilty about being the one he actually paid attention to. I didn't have an answer ready for that. 12 years of combat leadership hadn't prepared me for the particular disarmament of my little sister finally telling the truth on a ruined Persian rug at midnight. That doesn't fix the account, I said finally. It was the only honest thing I had. I know, she said. I'm not asking it to. I just needed you to know I saw you. Before tonight. I just never said it. I didn't forgive her right there. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip because someone finally says something true after a decade of lies. It's a longer road than that, and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise just to give the evening a tidier ending. But I nodded and something in the room shifted slightly, some old weight settling into a shape I could actually carry. Early the next morning, fog sat heavy over Carmel, the kind of thick coastal quiet that feels like the whole town is holding its breath. I hadn't unpacked anything the night before. Everything I owned still fit in one duffel bag, which had always struck me as either the saddest or the most honest fact about my life, depending on the day. I sat on the edge of the closet that used to be my room and pulled the envelope out of my jacket pocket, my mother's handwriting on the front, my name, nothing else. I opened it. Emily, I tried to stop your father from taking that money. I want you to know that. I've lost every argument in this house for 30 years. But I want you to know I fought that one harder than any of them. I should have told you a long time ago. I've been afraid of a lot of things in my life, and somewhere along the way, being afraid became easier than being honest. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth finally on paper where I can't take it back. You are the best thing I ever helped make, and I have never once told you that to your face. I'm sorry it took a piece of paper for me to finally say it. Love, Mom. I sat with that letter for a long time. I didn't cry. I'm not sure I remember how anymore. Not the kind of crying that comes easy. But I held the paper hard enough that my knuckles went white, and something in my chest loosened that had been locked shut for years. I found my mother in the kitchen, already awake, already pretending to be busy with something that didn't need doing. She looked up when I came in, and there was no performance left in her face at all. I didn't say anything about the letter. I just hugged her, a real one, not 6 inches of careful distance, not a performance for an audience. She held on longer than I expected her to. Next time you come home, she said quietly into my shoulder, use the front door. It wasn't a big statement. It wasn't going to fix 10 years in a single sentence. But it was true, and it was hers, and after everything, that was enough to start with. I found my father standing in the front doorway as I loaded my bag into the truck, still in yesterday's clothes, looking like he'd aged a decade overnight. He didn't step out onto the porch. He stood just inside the frame, hands gripping the wood, like some part of him understood he hadn't earned the right to close the distance between us. Emily, he said. My name caught in his throat like it cost him something to say it. He didn't finish it. Some apologies just don't make it out whole, and I'd learned a long time ago not to wait around for one that a person doesn't have the spine to complete. I didn't scream at him. I didn't demand the money back right there on the porch, the way some part of me, the part that still remembered 3 years of double shifts at a diner, genuinely wanted to. Dragging him through that fight would have meant staying tethered to this house for years. I didn't want to spend. I looked at him for a long moment, and then I did something I hadn't expected to do. I pulled out my phone, took 3 clear photographs of the bank statement right there in front of him, and put the folded original back in my jacket pocket. I'm not going to sue you, I said. His shoulders dropped half an inch, some old instinct toward relief. But I have a friend who's a JAG officer. She's going to send you a letter. Nothing that goes to a courthouse, nothing that cost you a cent today. Just an official statement confirming what happened to that account on record with your name and mine attached to it. I let that land before I kept going. I don't need your money back, Dad. I stopped needing it the day I found that shoebox. But I need you to know that the truth doesn't disappear just because nobody ever says it out loud in this house. He didn't say anything. There wasn't anything left for him to say. I climbed into the truck. As I pulled onto the road, I called Melissa Tran, a JAG ABJA officer I'd served alongside years earlier. Someone who'd pulled more than one enlisted kid out of a bad contract dispute out of nothing but stubbornness and a working knowledge of Article 15 procedures. I don't want a lawsuit, I told her when she picked up. I want a letter Formal, on record, no threats in it, just the truth, written down where it can't be argued with. Send it to his house, that's all. You got it, Major, she said. Consider it done. It wasn't justice, not in the way the movies would have written it, but it was something truer than revenge. A fact, permanently on record, sitting quietly in my father's mailbox where he'd have to look at it every time he collected the mail for the rest of his life. The coast highway unspooled ahead of me, empty at that hour, fog starting to lift off the water in slow gray ribbons. I drove with the window cracked, the cold Pacific air cutting sharp against my face, carrying salt and wet asphalt and something that felt, for the first time in longer than I wanted to admit, like room to breathe. I thought about the 12 years it had taken to get here, not the drive itself, but the longer one. The one that started the day I signed my enlistment papers at 18, with my mother's quiet cash in my pocket and my father's silence at the kitchen table where a goodbye should have been. I thought about every deployment I'd extended instead of coming home, every leave I'd spent on base instead of driving up this exact stretch of coastline. Every time I'd told myself the distance was about the job and not about a house that had never once felt safe to walk into through the front door. I thought about Melanie too, kneeling on that ruined rug, and the way her voice had cracked open into something that sounded, for once, like it might have been real. I didn't know yet whether I believed her. I wasn't sure it mattered as much as I used to think it would. Some doors you leave open a crack, not because you're certain what's on the other side, but because slamming them shut costs you something too. And I'd already given this family enough of myself for one lifetime. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the original bank statement, the paper itself, the physical thing that had sat folded against my chest for 2 days like a live round waiting to go off. I'd already done what I needed to do with it. Melissa had her photographs. The truth was on record, permanent, out of my hands and into the world in a way that didn't require me to stay and watch it happen. I didn't need to carry the paper anymore. I tore it in half, then in quarters, then eighths, the sound sharp and satisfying in the quiet cab of the truck. I rolled the window all the way down and held my closed fist out into the wind, and when I opened my hand, the scraps scattered behind the truck like something shedding itself off in the cold morning air. They owed me a childhood I wasn't going to get back. They owed me 3 years of double shifts, hazard pay, wired home, and spent on someone else's delusion. An apology I might never receive in full. I was writing off the debt anyway, not because they deserved to be forgiven, but because I deserved to stop carrying it. The road curved along the cliffs, and the sun finally broke through the marine layer behind me, over the coastal ridgeline, throwing long gold light down across the water ahead, like the ocean itself had caught fire. I kept my left hand resting on the open window frame, and the light caught the old scar running across my wrist, the one Melanie had spent years telling me to keep hidden under long sleeves so it wouldn't ruin the look of family photographs. I looked at it now, really looked, the way you look at something you finally stopped being ashamed of. It wasn't ugly. It never had been. It was proof, the kind that doesn't need anyone else's permission to mean something. Family isn't the people who share your blood while they empty your bank account and call you a coward at dinner parties, I thought, watching the light spread out gold across the Pacific. Family is the people who put on a uniform in the middle of someone else's living room because they'd rather stand up for a stranger than sit quietly through a lie. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I glanced down at a red light, one hand still on the wheel. Jack Rays, if you ever need a unit worth standing with, Major, the offer's open. No pressure. No timeline, just open. I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to fill the silence with a promise I wasn't ready to make. I set the phone back down, face up, and let it sit there in the morning light while I kept driving. Somewhere behind me, a house full of unfinished apologies was getting smaller in the rearview mirror, fog and pine trees swallowing it whole. Somewhere ahead, 400 miles of open highway stretched out toward a life that had never once asked my father's permission to exist. I thought about the training billet waiting for me at 29 Palms, 22-year-old Lance Corporals who needed someone to teach them how to read terrain before it decided things for them. I thought about how strange it was that I could walk a room full of hostile strangers in a combat zone and know exactly where every exit was, exactly how to read the temperature of a threat before it moved, and it had taken me until 31 years old to learn how to read my own family the same way. Some terrain you don't get trained for. You just have to survive it enough times to finally understand the map. My phone buzzed again somewhere around the Big Sur turnoff. I glanced down without slowing, an old habit checking threats even at 50 miles an hour. It was my mother this time. "Thank you for coming home. I know it cost you something." I typed back one line before I lost the signal in the canyon ahead. It always does. "That's all right. Some things are worth the cost. I am a soldier. I've spent 12 years learning that real courage rarely looks like the version people imagine. It isn't always the shout, the confrontation, the door kicked in. Sometimes it's the single sentence you finally let yourself say at a dinner table. Sometimes it's a letter you didn't have the courage to open for 2 days, sitting folded in a jacket pocket like a live round you're not ready to disarm yet. Sometimes it's simply choosing, quietly, to keep driving, not away from something but toward the version of your life you'd built for yourself before anyone else got the chance to define it for you. Freedom isn't waiting for the people who hurt you to finally see your worth. It isn't even really about them at all, in the end. Freedom is the morning you realize you stopped needing them to, and you drive on anyway toward whatever comes next, carrying only what's actually yours. If you've ever had to quietly heal from a wound someone in your own family gave you, you're not alone in that, and you never were. Whatever your version of that highway looks like, wherever it's taking you, I hope you find the courage to keep driving toward it.